in the year 1209, something unprecedented happened in the history of human persecution. An army of 20,000 soldiers marched into the south of France, but they were not carrying only swords. They were carrying lists, written lists, names, family names, and those names meant death. The Inquisition that followed the Albigensian Crusade created something the ancient world had never seen before, a bureaucratic machine designed to hunt bloodlines through language. Roman emperors had persecuted Christians, medieval kings had massacred villages, but the Dominican Inquisitors, who established their tribunals across Occitania, the rich and independent civilization of southern France, did something far more sophisticated. They built archives. Every name spoken in confession was recorded. Every family member mentioned during interrogation was written down and cross-referenced. Scribes worked alongside inquisitors, not as secretaries, but as weapons. A man named Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most prolific inquisitors of the 13th century, personally recorded over 5,000 depositions in a single year. 5,000 names, 5,000 families suddenly visible to the machinery of death. The registers of Toulouse, of Carcassonne, of Albi became the first systematic surname databases in European history. And they were databases built for one purpose: to find you, to find your children, and to find your children's children. The pen was not mightier than the sword. The pen was the sword. Because once your name was written in those ledgers, it could be read by any inquisitor, in any city, 50 years after you were dead, and your grandson could burn for your beliefs. The alphabet, for the first time in Western civilization, had been fully weaponized against entire bloodlines, and the alphabet became a tool for execution. Now here is where the story becomes extraordinary, because the families of Occitania were not passive. They were not simply hunted, they adapted. And the adaptation they chose was so elegant, so subtle, that it survived centuries of historical investigation undetected. They did not change their names. That would have been obvious. A family called Fabra that suddenly called itself Dupont would attract immediate suspicion from neighbors, from priests, from local officials who knew them. Instead, it did something far more brilliant. They shifted their names. They moved them slightly. They altered a single sound, a single consonant, a single vowel ending, just enough to create distance from the written record, without losing the oral continuity that allowed their own community to still recognize them. The Occitan name Vidal, meaning life, a name deeply associated with Catholic communities who believed in the preciousness of spiritual life, became Idal in some villages, or Vidal in others, or simply Vital when written by a French-speaking notary who heard the name spoken and recorded it through his own phonetic assumptions. The inquisitor, looking for Vidal in his register, might scan right past Vidal without connecting them. The particle D, meaning of or from, which indicated noble lineage or territorial origin in Occitan naming conventions, was frequently dropped or contracted. A family known as de Montfort in Occitan territories might reduce to Montfort, then to Montfort, then to Montfort, depending on who was writing and where. Each small variation created a documentary gap. Each gap was a breath of survival. Consider the name bonhomme, name directly associated with the Cathar Perfect, the spiritual leaders of the heretical movement. Inquisitors knew this name. It was in every register, but bonhomme, with a single letter dropped, appears in different records, and bonhomme appears in others, and in Aragon. Across the Pyrenees, where Cathar refugees fled, it becomes bonhomme. The name is the same name. The family is the same family. The survival is hidden in the subtle shift of a single consonant. But phonetic shifting was only one strategy. For those who needed to travel further, who fled not just to the next village, but to entirely different linguistic worlds, across the Pyrenees into Castile, north into Brittany, across the Channel into England or Scotland, a more dramatic transformation was required. And this transformation gives us some of the most haunting evidence of survival that historical linguistics has ever uncovered. They translated their names, literally. They took the meaning of their Occitan surname and rendered it into the language of their new home, a family named Lobaton in Occitan, derived from loba, meaning wolf, the animal that prowled the mountains of the Languedoc and had become embedded in Cathar symbolic culture, appears to become wolf in Germanic territories, lobo in Iberia, and most strikingly, in Scotland and northern England, becomes wolf or wolf. Or even the Gaelic fowl. The sound is completely different. The spelling is completely different, but the meaning is identical, and the meaning is the fingerprint. The Occitan surname Riu, meaning river or stream, a geographical surname common across the watershed territories where Cathar communities thrived, becomes Rivera in Catalonia as families cross the mountains. It becomes Rivière as French-speaking administrators record it in Burgundy. And in England, handled through Norman French intermediaries, it arrives as Rivers or River, a noble English surname, whose Occitan origin has been almost completely obscured. The family moved, the language changed. But the river kept flowing, a translated shadow of the original bloodline. So what does this mean for you? Watching this, perhaps carrying one of these names, without ever knowing its history, here is how you begin to read the scars in your own family tree. The first signal is orthographic chaos. If you search historical census records, church registers, and municipal documents for your own surname, and you find the same name spelled 3 or 4 different ways, within the same family across 2 or 3 generations, that instability is not the result of clerical carelessness alone. Scribes were inconsistent, yes, but radical spelling variation within a single documented family, particularly between the 13th and 16th centuries in southern France, northern Spain, or the Cathar diaspora regions of Italy and England, often indicates a family in the process of deliberate phonetic camouflage. Look for consonant substitutions, particularly between V and B, between T and D, between F and V. These are the classic Occitan phonetic shifts. Look for the disappearance of prefixes, names that begin with D or del in early records, and lose that particle a generation later. Look for names that appear to be translated rather than changed. If your French ancestors were called Le Blanc, the white, and your Scottish ancestors with the same documented lineage were called white, you are not looking at a coincidence. You are looking at a survival strategy. Look especially at the geographic record. If your family appears suddenly in a new region between 1230 and 1330, with no documented origin point, no parish record explaining where they came from, but carrying a name that has a phonetic cousin in the Occitan territories of southern France, you are looking at a refugee family. A family that arrived, presented a slightly altered name, and built a new life on the foundation of a linguistic disguise that was never meant to be decoded. The name you are searching for is still there in those records, waiting in the archives of Carcassonne, waiting in the municipal registers of Toulouse, waiting in the inquisitorial depositions that have been taken and are now accessible to anyone with an internet connection and a willingness to look. It is waiting for you, waiting for someone to recognize its original sound. The Inquisitors succeeded in many of their goals. The Kaffir civilization of Occitania was destroyed. Its theology was exterminated. Its distinctive culture, its literature in the langue d'oc, its tradition of courtly poetry and philosophical inquiry was suppressed so thoroughly that most people alive today have never heard of it. The last known Cathar perfect, Guillaume Belibast, was burned at the stake in 1321, and with him, the organized religious movement ended. But the families did not end. The bloodlines continued, disguised, dispersed, translated, shifted by a consonant here and a vowel there, carried across mountains and oceans and centuries in the mouths of people who may not have even known why their grandparents had changed a single letter in the family name. The Occitan language came within centuries of total extinction, preserved only in isolated mountain villages and in the work of 19th century Romantic scholars who recognized what was almost lost. And yet the resistance of those persecuted families survives. It survives in genealogical records. It survives in the orthographic variations that historians once dismissed as clerical error. It survives in the strange fact that an English family named Wolf, and a French family named Loup, and a Spanish family named Lobel may all be drawing water from the same deep linguistic well, a well dug in the mountains of southern France, by people who refused to disappear completely even when inquisitors came with their lists and their pens and their burning certainty. Your surname is not just a label. It may be a message from ancestors who found a way to say, "We are still here. We've changed the sound, but kept the meaning. We have shifted the consonant, but preserved the blood." Listen carefully to what your name is telling you, because every altered ending, every dropped particle, every translated meaning is an act of defiance that outlasted the institution that tried to erase it, because a name altered for survival is still a name that survived.